Is Teams out of control in your organization? If you're like many of our clients, you might be experiencing a chaotic environment where there's no rhyme or reason to when people create a team versus a channel, which teams are in active use, which ones aren't. Are people sharing things via group chat, OneDrive? The list goes on. The good news is that we've come up with a pretty foolproof approach that not only helps end users to understand how best to use Teams, but actually helps you to wrangle both the Teams environment and the underlying content environment in ways that are going to prepare you for Copilot. So let's dive in. So there's 3 apps, just to kind of boil it down to the simplest elements that we are concerned about when we're trying to do a refresh of, Microsoft 365. Teams is the front door. This is where people should be going day to day to do their work, communicate with colleagues, interact with content, share files, store files. This is where all the action takes place. And so I want, staff to think of it that way. And this is where they should go to deal with their files. And I'll get to more of that in a minute because that's a critical piece here. OneDrive, this is the place where you store your personal files, right? This is your personal drive within 365. Technically, it lives on the SharePoint cloud. It's like your own private partitioned piece of the SharePoint cloud. But the important part here is that we see a lot of people hoarding content, usually not on purpose, but just because they don't know where else to put it. And that content really belongs to a department or a project or something like that, but it's living on a person's OneDrive. And then they're sharing it. Maybe they're, sharing it in a Teams chat. They're sharing it ad hoc here and there. The problem is over time, this becomes a bear for that person to manage. They're managing one-off permissions on a ton of files. People can't remember how they got to them and how they can access them again. They've got to go back and dig through their email or chats to find those links. And then probably most importantly is if that person moves on to another position or leaves the organization, all that stuff is sitting in their OneDrive and somebody has to deal with it. Usually what happens is no one deals with it. The OneDrive gets archived, people lose access, stuff goes missing, and it's kind of a nightmare. So we need to make sure that people are using their OneDrive the way it's intended, which is your personal drive. Then finally, SharePoint, which has been, kind of the key player for many years around file management, still is. It is the file warehouse for all things M365. It has amazing capabilities around version control, real-time content collaboration, all that good stuff. But it kind of shrinks into the background, meaning that people don't have to go to SharePoint as a destination to work on their team files. All of that stuff is accessible within Teams, and I'll share more on that in a moment. The only reason, generally speaking, that somebody would need to go to SharePoint as a destination is if you're using SharePoint communication sites for, let's say, your intranet or your knowledge hub. That's a great use of SharePoint, but those are areas that should be intentionally designed with a global nav. Otherwise, if people are just going to random sites within SharePoint with none of that, information architecture thought through, you're literally sending them into the forest and expecting that they're going to find what they need. And it's quite confusing. I can't tell you how many times I've seen, people spin up team sites, for example, to share, team related content outside of Teams. And, they haven't even set up their homepage within that team SharePoint site. So it's like the generic template, the generic navigation. It's super confusing, not user-friendly at all. So just stay away from that unless you have intentionally designed spaces in SharePoint. Okay, so that's like the core framework. Now I'm going to talk about, how we introduce the idea of the relationship between Teams and SharePoint as far as content storage and collaboration goes to end users, because this is super confusing. And, I know a lot of IT people out there, you get this, but frankly, a lot of you don't. So don't don't be embarrassed. This is a great way to explain it, both to your end users, but to anyone really that's working closely with Microsoft 365. Okay. So I'm going to reveal the mysteries about how content storage works in Teams. So ready for it? Here we go. Okay. Over on the left, we have a team called Team A. A team is basically just an empty container that has a set of permissions around it, defined by the membership and ownership of that team, right? All of that you set up on the team side. Then underneath, we've got a few different channels. Channels are actually where the work happens in Teams. So channels consist of a discussion area, a files area, and a bunch of other stuff that you can add to them. But let's just focus on the files for now. So if I have a standard channel called General, that's kind of the default channel in a team, and I put files in there, what happens with those files? Well, over on Team site called Team A in this case, that's a SharePoint team site that has been spun up when you create Team A in Teams. There is a folder at the root level of the document library over there called General. All the files that you store in that General channel Files tab are actually stored in a folder, a root level folder called General that was created automatically. Okay, great. So then you spin up additional channels, channel 1, channel 2, and likewise, there are folders that are automatically created at the root level. So that means that permissions are controlled on the team side. Automatically, everybody that's a member of that team has read-write access to all of those files in that standard channel. Okay. If they were to go over to SharePoint, although I don't recommend that they do, they don't need to, but if they did go to that team site, that's what they would see, and they would have that level of access. Okay. Private channels, on the other hand, are a slightly different animal. So if you spin up a private channel in a team, what that means is you can lock that channel down, all of its contents, discussions, files, etc., to a subset of your team members. Okay, but when you do that, on the SharePoint side, what SharePoint actually does is it creates a separate team site. It's kind of a sub team site to the parent. And what that does is it allows for you to have a unique set of permissions, which are defined by the membership of that private channel, right? So spin up a private channel. Likewise, in the team site for that private channel, I get a folder that houses all the content for that channel. Okay. Where this gets a little spicy is the following. What we see a lot is that people who are used to using SharePoint, or more used to using SharePoint than Teams, they go over to that team site for Team A, and they start building out additional folder structures at the root level. So at the same level where we see those general channel 1 and channel 2 folders, they start building out additional folders and putting stuff in there. Okay, what happens then? People go into the files tab within those channels over on Team A, and they don't see those files. Why? Because those files aren't living in a folder that is linked to that specific channel. They're living outside of the folder structure that Teams has created over on the SharePoint side. So what do? Make sure that people don't do that. The easiest way to do that is just to tell people, if you're creating new folders and you want to rearrange the structure of the content within your channels, do it within the Teams interface, not on the SharePoint interface. Again, a great reason not to go to SharePoint. Okay. Next, I want to talk about just what this might look like from an organizational structure. Okay, so if we put these key principles into practice, then, what does this look like when we kind of zoom out at an organizational level? What we like to do is to make sure that every team has an explicit purpose, and that there are only a specified few types of purposes that an entire team can serve. So the most obvious one is a departmental team. I personally, and I've seen this play out pretty well with our clients. I like to have a one-to-one relationship for department to team, meaning that every department has one official team. And I'll tell you why. There's a couple reasons. A, it's simple. You can have lots of channels under a team. The membership is straightforward because everyone who's a member of Department A is a member of that team. And you don't, get a big kind of messy permission structure on your hands. Number two, every time you create a team, you create a Microsoft 365 group, which is essentially a permissions group that can be used in a variety of ways across Microsoft 365. So the benefit of having a one-to-one relationship between teams and M365 groups and departments means that you have one official departmental team, which means you have one official department M365 group, and you can identify that group. You could use it as the email address for that group. There's a whole variety of ways that you can make use of that M365 group outside of Teams as well. So consider it. Other types of teams, working groups, cross-organizational projects. I like to have a prefix before the team name so that I know what kind of team it is. So if it's a departmental team, DEPT, if it's a project team, PROJ, that kind of thing. And then, of course, we have our teams that might need to be externally accessible. And so, those should have their own notation, whether it's a prefix or a suffix, to note that those are externally accessible, meaning you're inviting guests that are not inside the organization into that team to collaborate, which is a great use of Teams. You just have to set up, the permissions and security accordingly. Okay, so how do you do all this? Let's say you're facing a situation where you have a huge mess of teams on your hands. There's no rhyme or reason to how they've been set up. Users are confused. They're storing a ton of things in OneDrive, sharing links from their OneDrive inside of random, group chats and team channels, and they don't even know where they are half the time. How do you wrangle all this? Well, we have a formula that has worked incredibly well for that. Here it is. It's tedious. I'm going to give you that warning up front. However, the payoff of this is huge. And the bonus is you really only have to do this like one time in your organization. If you do this now, you will reap the benefits well into the future. So now is as best a time as any. And honestly, with the coming of Copilot, if Copilot isn't already in your organization, it will be soon, meaning Copilot, for Microsoft 365. This reorg and refresh approach is going to help you clean up outdated content, identify where the highest value content is, get it all into shape, get your M365 permission groups into shape. There's just tons of fringe benefits to this that are really worthwhile. So this is what you do. You go department by department. You do an initial kickoff where you introduce the principles that I just spoke about and just watch as the light bulbs start to turn on with the people that you're talking to. Honestly, this simple framework just makes sense to the end user, especially if they've been struggling to make sense of Teams for so long. So get them grounded in these core principles, and that should get them relatively excited about reorganizing the mess that they have on their hands now. Then find out, how are they collaborating? Where is their content stored? What's going on? Do they have everything already in Teams, or is it scattered across Teams and SharePoint sites and OneDrives and file shares and Dropboxes and all of that? Get a full layout of where their content lives, the content that belongs in this case to like their department, right? Then come up with a structure that mirrors how they actually want to work. So walk through it with them. okay, if we had a departmental team, what would be the channels, the distinct work streams, the distinct, sublayers of permissions where we might need private channels? Just map it all out. We like to use a visual mapping tool like whiteboarding. You can use Miro or any kind of whiteboard tool for this and do it live with them because, once they see it, it starts to all fall into place. Draft that plan, get it reviewed by the department. This might take a couple meetings. I mean, depending on how complicated it is, but you got to invest the time in this. This is really where the gold is. Okay. Now, there isn't a ton of cleanup. We don't want to create this huge barrier where we're going to tell the departments, oh, you got to go through, 20 years worth of files and clean everything up. Basically focus on the things that are in active use and that they need active access to. You can deal with the archive stuff later. Let's just focus on the gold, okay? Identify those things, map them to the refresh team structure. So, stuff from this place is going to come here. This is going to go into this channel, da, 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 da. All right. Build out that new team structure and then support them to migrate those files. So, you can use a variety of tools for this depending on where your content is living. We love the ShareGate migration tool, especially if you've got stuff out on, file shares, Google, other random locations, as well as other Microsoft 365 tenants. ShareGate it's totally worth it. But you can also use other things. Doesn't matter. Just get the files where they need to be in that new team structure. And then as everything is set up, as soon as that happens, you want to host a cutover session or whatever you like to call it. We call it a cutover session. Basically, it's a 90-minute training and orientation where we take, in this case, the entire department and we walk them through their new structure, the rationale for it, some of the collaboration norms, that we recommend and that whoever is leading it from their side has agreed to, like always use @mention and discussion posts. We're going to use the general channel for this, that kind of thing. And then introduce some Teams best practices. How do you share a file inside of Teams? What's the order of operations when you have a file that you want to share with your team and it's currently living in OneDrive? How do you get it into that team space? How do you access your team folders via File Explorer? All that great stuff so that they don't stumble out of the gate, right? We want to make sure that we're curbing any of those easy to miss details about how to work effectively in Teams right away. We also want to, highlight that they can customize Teams in a variety of ways for their own use at the channel level, at the individual level by adding apps that they like to use on the left-hand side. That's all very exciting stuff, and it reinforces this idea of Teams as the front door. Okay, so we do the 90-minute training. People are off and running, but don't just, forget about them. Give them a couple weeks to settle in and then follow up. You want to follow up with them. How are things going? Are there any difficulties? Is the structure working for you? Offer some support, make sure that all the files are where they are supposed to be, all that good stuff. And then be there and give them a place to easily access those who are close to this program, whether, it's IT or other folks that are leading this, so that they feel supported. It's not going to feel exactly right on day one, but I guarantee you're going to get great results. And as you start doing this across the organization, it's like this magic puzzle. Things just start falling into place. And this is, an amazing way to both build a stronger connection and alliances with people across the organization, but also to get them ready for all the cool Copilot stuff as well. All right, so that's my spiel for today. Again, I'm Sara Teitelman from Ideal State. Thank you. If this is a lot and you need help, We can help you. We actually run these types of programs for our clients all the time. So if you just need help or advice or anything, slides, get in touch at our website here, and good luck. This is worth it. Okay.